Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Future Group. Each episode explores a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Before we jump into today's episode, let's meet the panel, starting with Fernando. Hey, Fernando, it's good to see you.
Hello, everyone. Fernando Montenegro. I lead cybersecurity research for our research arm. And it's always a pleasure to be here and chatting with you all. I just came back from a trip to South America, and I'm still a little jet lagged, but it'll be fine.
Well, we're glad to have you back.
Famous last words. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. And on lead guitar always is Mitch Ashley. Mitch, good to see you as well.
Thank you. And turn it to 11. You know, if you got 11, it's going to be louder than 10. So we'll shout out to Rob. So anyway, Mitch Ashley, I lead the software lifecycle engineering practice, which crosses over into some security areas. And so I get to work with Fernando real closely. And of course, Tom on the podcast and other activities. So great to be here.
And of course, I'm Tom Hollingsworth, event lead for all things related to security at Tech Field Day, which is a part of the Future Group. Let's jump into today's episode. Now, depending on when you're listening to this, it might be old news by now, but vibe coding is real, folks, because Linus Torvalds actually used vibe coding to check some things in to the Linux kernel. Now, he had some comments about it. He said it did probably a little bit of a better job than I could have on some of the things, but I still had to go back and remind it to do some other stuff, which has led to a little bit of a discussion as we're recording this as to whether or not vibe coding is a real thing or if it's just something that advanced programmers can use to kind of help lay the groundwork. But what really matters is the fact that no matter whether it's real or not, the security implications of what vibe coding offers are, I'm not capable of telling you exactly how deep they go. But luckily, one company that is Palo Alto Networks. And Mitch brought this up for our discussion today. It's something they're calling the SHIELD framework. Now, I imagine that it is a distinctly different round shield with a star in the middle that in no way can be traced back to Disney or Marvel, because that would be wrong, and we can't infringe on anybody's copyright. But I'm sure that, you know, some of the things they're talking about when it comes to separation of duties and keeping humans in the loop are things that we have preached quite a bit here at the Security Boulevard podcast. So Mitch, I want to let you kind of introduce what SHIELD is all about, and then we can kind of talk about whether or not it really is the optimal way to do things.
Great. Well, I think as long as they steer away from agents of SHIELD, they probably keep,
I was going to make the joke, but that's okay.
Oh gosh, I didn't mean to steal the joke.
No, that's totally fine. You go with it. Right?
Tom did such a nice setup. I couldn't let it hang out there too.
Oh God, yeah.
So, well, first of all, kudos to Palo Alto Networks for putting this out there. You know, vibe coding is a real thing. It's not, not all code's going to be created through vibe coding, but a lot of citizen developers, if you will, are using, of course, vibe coding, but so are pro code, so are professional developers. And you mentioned Linus, who we no doubt about his coding skills. So it's a real thing, and it's going to be with us for a long time. So SHIELD stands for, let me just kind of run through the letters. S is separation of duties, followed by human in the loop, input and output validation, enforced security focused helper models. Long one there. Least agency. Defensive, which I think is like least privileges, right? Just from execution standpoint. Defensive tactical controls. And then let's see. Oh, that's the last one. SHIELD. Got them all. So it's, my just take on it is this going to take over the world and everybody's going to say, oh my God, this is what's missing. Now we can let vibe coding go, on its own journey into the organization and not worry about security? Of course not. But a lot of these are, I think, just mapping what we know as security principles to an agent kind of world, to an agent-led development type environment. You could apply this to whether it's AI assisted or not vibe coded, but still AI-centric development too.
I want to jump in here, Mitch, because I think you bring up a really interesting point. Nothing in SHIELD is different than any of what we would consider to be best practices, right? Least privileges, giving people the minimum amount necessary to do their job, validating inputs and outputs so we don't get eaten up by them. these are all very good things. I don't necessarily think that they only apply to vibe coding and stuff like that. Now, is vibe coding probably the biggest risk that we face right now? Yeah, I would say that it is, because one of the things that we're going to have to deal with over the course of the next several months, years, is what happens when people with no programming background try to program, because that's really what we're dealing with right now. It's like, I have a 16-year-old daughter. A couple of years ago, she's like, "Dad, can I learn how to drive?" And I said, "Sure, but there's a process, right? I'm going to teach you, sit behind the wheel where all the controls are. Then we're going to do it in a controlled area, like a parking lot that's empty. Then we're going to start building up." You would not give my daughter access to Gemini and say, "Figure out how to drive. How hard can it be?" Drivers do it all the time.
So, now, yeah, so many thoughts floating right now. I think that I agree with you that this is something that uh, it's coming. It's something that in a sense, it's already here. And yes, we should do it in a controlled manner. I would like to shift, not shift the conversation, but I would like to point out something that there's a deeper philosophical discussion, right? I think it was Cory Doctorow who talks about code is a liability, right? Every code that you write is something that you have to maintain later, right? And the other, and I mentioned this because I came across an article the other day that talks about AI can write code. AI can't do software engineering, right? And that is a phenomenal point that I think we should keep in mind when we look at the expectation, what we expect out of the vibe coded deluge of stuff that's coming, right? Yes, it can be extremely helpful in some scenarios. Like I think that it's revolutionizing things like prototyping and whatnot. Um, I shudder to think of production, which is why I think some of the stuff like the Shield framework is interesting, because it's catchy and it touches on the things that, yes, they are not novel, right? But just let's keep them. Let's keep the problem contained as much as we can.
Well, it's a good point. I definitely agree with you. It's, software is about software engineering. Now we have low code, no code solutions today that people create great applications from. Many of them they don't go to IT to work with, but a vast majority of them involve IT. Even IT is using a lot of those low code, no code tools. Same thing here. The issue with vibe coding, if we're talking to a security audience here, so many people may not have messed around with writing code with AI, but it's much like a session that you would have with Claude or with OpenAI, with ChatGPT, where you hammer on that session. You have a series of prompts. After a while, it tends to drift because the context window is now too large to contain all of the conversation, especially when you're dealing with code, because you're generating a lot of text. And so it's a bit problematic just to go through a session and vibe code something from scratch all the way to the end in a session. And that's why you see vendors coming out with things like intent-based development or spec-based development. We're kind of going back to realizing that you have to do a lot of really good prompt work. And I don't mean prompt engineering, I mean specifications kind of prompt, defining requirements, limitations, what the tech stack looks like, et cetera, to drive that. Now, if you know that already, that could be input to your vibe coding. But that's that part of that process of engineering, which is the upfront requirements design and how you want the code to behave and look.
And absolutely, I just want to interject with a thing. Like I was chatting, I think Mitch just before on the pre-recording here was chatting with the guy, and I mentioned that I was vibe coding something over the weekend, and I can read JavaScript really well. I can't write JavaScript really well, but I vibe coded my way through something that I needed. And one of the things that always struck me when vibe coding with is that if you don't tell the system in what software engineering instructions, you end up with a mess because, not to make this thing too long, but one of the things we were doing is we're writing some JavaScript code, and then at some point I stopped and said, "Look, shouldn't we be refactoring this into separate modules and so on?" And of course they are very obsequious and they say, "Oh yes, you're absolutely right." And then they recommended that we break it apart into different modules and so on and so forth. And then at some point I said, "Look, shouldn't this thing here be hard coded here? Shouldn't it be an environment variable somewhere?" Or "Oh yes, you're absolutely right," and then do the same thing. Right? I'm not saying I'm not a great I'm not a software engineer by any means, but like these little things. And to your point, um, we need to help organizations understand this and then develop the right guardrails for, okay, if you're going to vibe code, right, this is what you should expect. And you're an expert at this. So, yes, this is very much the issue of letting this thing run amok. It will make mistakes. It will use bad practice. I haven't followed up on so much on the reports yet, but I think that there is a significant number of people indicating that the code that this is generated, it's still vulnerable code. It's vulnerable code at scale now. So again, why this SHIELD framework is interesting.
Yeah, I think that, and some of the models are getting better about that, but it's still very much an issue around vulnerabilities. I'm thinking about the SHIELD framework, the kind of what they've set up here at Palo Alto.
Yeah.
The one that really jumps out at me is enforced security-focused helper models. And there's a good article that Mike Vizard put up on securityboulevard.com, so check it out. We'll include a link in the description. About invoke external and independent helper modules to perform SAS testing, secret scanning, security control validation, blah, 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 to identify vulnerabilities and hard-coded secrets prior to deployment. So you could say that's true for any kind of code, right? And probably is. Hopefully people are invoking routines or processes in their tool chain and their workflows that they do with software already. Same applies with vibe coding and using AI tools. Now, I think it's going to evolve to be a little bit of a different form where security and things like observability really are baked in through more security guardrails that are part of the development process. It's just another linear step in the development process. But to their point, we really need some very good agents, very good modules, AI models, that are really good at security, not just testing, but generating and verifying code as it's being generated so that it comes out relatively secure. There's fewer things for scanners and other things to find.
I think an important point that everybody listening to this podcast needs to mark a note is what Mitch just said. They come out secure. Not we eventually make them secure. Not we think we figured out how to get this working. Is that one of the advantages of having something that is generated by an agent or an algorithm is that the things that we would normally do in a system to deal with error handling or deal with security issues are baked in when the prompt or the guidelines say that we need to do that. Like I can remember, taking intro to programming, more years ago than I care to mention. And the fact that we went and learned how function calls worked, and we went and we learned how to iterate through loops. And then, and only then, did we learn, oh yeah, and you have to wrap all of them in exception handling, right? If this fails, shell to this message or something like that. And I remember the person who was teaching me this was a programmer for the Air Force by day. And she flat out said, she goes, most of your code is going to look like this. Like when you write the actual code, you're going to have so many wrappers for exception handling that it's going to blow your mind because we have to be ready for everything that could possibly happen. And I think that that's one of the advantages of this is that by giving it a narrow focus, like you guys have said, by telling it, I need you to go in and iterate on this function, or I need you to iterate on this block of code. Because I mean, in what I mentioned at the top, that's exactly what Linus did. Is he had it go over his code and say, okay, make this look better. And then it was having problems with the selection algorithm. And then it was like, I need you to work on this thing specifically. And that's a lesson that we've been teaching people in computer science for a lot more years than I've been programming, is don't try to eat an elephant, all at once. You've got to break it down into sections. You've got to figure out how to solve that problem. And then once that problem's solved, then you move on to the next problem. And I think that that's one of the things that people who try to jump feet first into coding don't understand is you've got to break it down and you've got to secure each of those functions. Because how many times have we heard that, there was a security breach because one module of an overall program had a hole in it that we got away from us. Like we cannot, if we try to boil the ocean, so to speak, we will forget something. That is just human nature.
It goes back to the point I made earlier. Code is a liability, right? It takes an experienced software engineer to know when they need code to fix something, right? There is of course, I'm going to bring in economics at some point, right? There is it's in economics, it's known as the Jevons paradox, right? Which is this notion that when something becomes cheaper, right, we would expect that when something becomes more efficient, we would expect less usage of it. But actually, no, we have more, right? Because now you can do more things more efficiently. And it's being shown all over the world. I think the original definition started with coal in the 1860s, but it definitely applies to code now, right? In this age of vibe coding, it's not that we're going to need fewer software engineers. We're going to need more software engineers. It's just that those software engineers are now doing higher level, more efficient things, right? But I think you brought up a phenomenal point. Like when you were teaching what to do, and you were saying like Linus was iterating over a function. Linus is an very experienced software engineer, right? Give that software engineer a tool like vibe coding, and you get tremendous amount of things. Give someone who's not a software engineer the expectation of, hey, I'm going to vibe code my way through an entire application, and I'm going to post that, and it's going to be something that eventually is going to have users, and it's going to have passwords, and it's going to have credit card details and whatnot, and you can see where this is going, right? So it is very, very important for us to get this right. We're not going to get this right completely, of course, but it's so critical that we do. Sorry, I'm ranting as usual. And
now, one of the things I would recommend, Fernando, is, and I said to our audience, our listeners, maybe many of the folks are not developers or have done a lot of development. This is a good chance to get exposed to it. I'm very much kind of a do-it learner, right? About 50% is like going and researching it, and the other 50% is doing it and figuring out how things work and how to secure it. And you could pretty easily do some vibe coding, with Gemini if you have a Google account, or with Microsoft tools. Visual Studio Code is free, and you can use a number of models to do this, either Claude or you could use the OpenAI model. They're very good. Go write some code. Do kind of a function. Create a little utility for yourself. Maybe it's processing some files on your file system. Maybe it's taking flagged emails or labeled emails and doing something with it, or sending you an email summary of it, something like that. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. But the point of it is you'll see the process of, oh, well, I know it's not only just writing the code that's going to be generated by the model. It's, I need to set up an API to get to this service in my mail system or in Google or the directory or whatever that I'm using. How is that being secured? What kind of settings are available to that? Because if end users are doing this, non-technical folks, okay, that might be interesting, might be a problem, might be something we want to know more about and dig into further. What are some of the privileges that are inherited just because you're using your own account, your company account, as part of the vibe coding system that you're building together? In other words, take the whole in context of what it means to create an application, not just generate code. You'll learn a ton. And you may never pick it up again. You may say, hey, this is really handy. I might want to do some things with this. But you'll start to see for yourself where some of those exposures are.
And picking up on that, if you are a cybersecurity professional who is not as Mitch said, as involved in coding, there are many examples within what you do on a day-to-day basis where you can apply some of this. Perhaps your SIM already has an enrichment function, but if it doesn't, would it help you to write one? Hey, like Mitch said, I can go in and learn how to query from an API, query the SIM, get the data, or then potentially query what your threat intel source is going to be, pick that up, mumble them, send it back, or whatever. If you are in GRC, can I automate the collection of artifacts that we're going to use for validating compliance, or can I use even better? Can you take the artifacts that you're using, and then you can play around with large language models to perhaps interpret that, and then you'll see that the output of that large language model may not be exactly what you wanted, but that's fine. Like, you're experimenting with that. So I cannot think of an area of cybersecurity where there isn't some little function, some little use case where you can't, you as a professional, experiment with it, right? Like I said, perhaps it never sees the light of day, but it got you a little bit further, right? Lifelong learning, people. Lifelong.
Get your head in the headspace for sure. And that, one of the sort of fallacies about agents, quote unquote, is that the agents aren't just prompts. Most agents are actually have a lot of code involved in your regular software code, along with some prompting into the LLM. So a lot of the processing still happens in regular code. So when you hear people are developing agents, don't assume that's just a prompt that you've got to worry about prompt injection and how to make that more secure, efficient, et cetera. There's code involved.
There's code, and there is a spectrum of things, right? I mean, there are things that are agentic workflows, and there are things that are agents, right? And they are different, but all of them involve code. Absolutely, I think that and Mitch has done a phenomenal work on tracking how some of these things should be secured. Like he's done some work on the agentic protocols and so on. So I highly recommend people. So if you, as you listen to us, as you watch us, go check out the stuff that Mitch has put out on agentic protocols, for example. It's top notch.
Well, I'm firing my publicist and hiring you. Thank you, Fernando. You're a great colleague.
I get the pleasure of reading or sometimes peer reviewing that stuff. Oh my God.
We do peer review each other's stuff a lot.
It's awesome.
Which is great. Same back to you, too. You're doing great work.
Fantastic work. Yeah. Speaking of putting things out there, recently we had TechStrong TV's Predict 2026. If you didn't get a chance to tune in, make sure you head over to TechStrong TV and check it out. It was great. But now that I have two of the people who were involved in the making of that, I wanted to give you guys just a few minutes here at the end of the episode to give me one of your security predictions for 2026, because I'm fascinated to see where people think security is headed in the next 12 months. Mitch, I guess I'll start with you. What was one of the things that you think people are going to be seeing in 2026 from a security perspective that they need to be on top of?
Well, I think the DevSecOps folks will be pleased to hear, and this is both the security and the software side of it, is shift left is going to give way to something called continuous guardrails. So we've really struggled with shifting left. It makes a lot of sense to do things earlier in the process, but we still kind of are left out of the code writing process, and we're leveraging scanning to actually perform a lot of the security for us. What's happening in the market, because AI is moving so quickly, everybody wants to be part of the new stack, the platforms that AI and agents are being built on. So you see observability companies, security companies creating agents or specifications, things that can be added even into, like when AWS announced their security agent, other companies were partnering along with that so that you could implement guardrails as part of the development and execution environments. And I think that's our hope for the next evolution of DevSecOps shift left. We probably won't say shift left that much anymore, but I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with predictions, right? In the context that it's great fun to do them. We should always be checking to see how did we get them right? Did we not get them right? But, okay, it's a fun exercise. But I always think that part of our role as analysts is to help understand these broader trends and then just highlight, okay, you know what, this kind of thing is happening more often. Is that a prediction? I'm not so sure. Like, uh, uh, anyway, I think that the ones I if you watched our session, you saw some of these, but I think that besides the ones around, yes, more agentic AI, more particular focus on identity in 2026. I think that 2026 is going to be a very identity centric year. But outside of that, I and this comes up a lot in conversations, is I think that we are seeing, and even ties back to our vibe coding conversation, is that the pain that organizations are feeling, like when we talk to them, is, yes, all of this is going on and all of this is important, but all of this has to work together, right? So one of the things we're calling out is that, okay, great, we're doing all of this effort in releasing new functionality in whatever field or whatever format. It has to integrate well together, right? So I'm hoping that 2026 is the year where we do focus a little bit more on the integration effort between things, right? I one of the visuals that stays with me is, I'll give props here to F5. They have that visual. I'm not sure if you ever saw it, the ball of fire, right? Which is the overwhelming complexity of a modern planetary scale application that touches content delivery networks, that touches serverless functions, that touches actual VMs and containers and Kubernetes and all over the place. Supporting that complexity requires tremendous amounts of integration work. And I think that one of the things that we're calling out is this notion of, how are we going to support that kind of integration? I'm sorry if I sound fluffy, but it's the one of the things on my mind. The other one, I'll just is that as we focus on the two things most important that I see are identity and data, right? And as we focus on data security, right, we called out this change from backup and recovery to cyber resilience, and I think that we're moving more towards more integrated data security platforms, and those data security platform functionality, right? And that functionality is covering structured data that ties to the API, that ties to the code, that ties to unstructured data. Again, we can tie LLMs and so on with resilience, like what we used to call backup and recovery, right? So we're seeing this merger of support for unstructured data, support for structured data, support for primary storage and backup storage. We're seeing these things kind of merge together, and it's interesting. I mean, whether that be coming from people like Sierra or Veeam or Commvault and others, right? That's a really interesting evolution for 2026. I think that how this is merging a little bit more.
So I'll jump in because I didn't actually get to give any predictions for the Predict show, but I'll be a little more concrete than Fernando. I think that 2026 is going to be a banner year for security startups related to AI, because companies that are bigger are too busy trying to figure out how they're going to use it instead of how they're going to integrate it into their products. So they're going to overlook a lot of things, and small startups are going to make bank when that time comes. Because the other thing I think that's going to happen is sometime in the middle of the year, we're going to have some kind of AI data leakage situation that is so massive and also so legally far-reaching that a lot of companies are going to have to make some hard choices about how they secure their data and how they've integrated AI into all of their products. And that may not sound like a concrete thing, like I'm not putting names to faces, but I think that we are definitely neglecting a lot of the pieces that are important for us to keep everything safe at the behest of trying to make the line go up and once that happens, it takes something really earth-shattering to make people realize that line go up is not the only purpose of a business. And so I think we'll see that this year because we've missed it too many times in the last 24 months. The odds are not in your favor there. Speaking
Yeah,
of
we should
which,
we should do an episode on that. By the way, we should talk about when the asteroid is going to hit the Earth, then everybody will do something about what security, right? And do it. Does those things ever happen, or they rarely do? I'd love to do an episode on that. That'd be fun.
well, let's leave it up to the audience. Do you guys want to see an episode about what happens when disaster is imminent and now it's suddenly time to do security? If you do, leave a comment on this episode and we'll put it on the lineup. But it may have to be a couple of episodes out because my two co-hosts are super busy with a lot of stuff that they've got going on. Fernando, what are you working on that people should check out?
So I'm writing a report right now. It's a little later than I thought, but I'm writing a report on cyber physical systems. Right. I think that there is something to be said here on the evolution of what we used to call IoT or OT security. I think it's evolved, and I think it's the perfect. I shouldn't say perfect. I think it's the final level boss, if you will, of securing a lot of things. It brings in the complexity of regulatory frameworks. It brings in the complexity of a massively complex supply chain. It brings in the complexity of severe constraints on operating environments and end user behavior and all of those things. So I think it's a very important area for people to grow their familiarity with, support those kinds of use cases. So that's my next report. I'm deep into it, and there have been some massive acquisitions in the space. I mean, Mitsubishi and Nozomi and ServiceNow and Armis. So it's really interesting to see what's going on here.
And Mitch, what have you got going on?
Well, juggling lots of things, but the thing that's foremost in my mind is we're putting the final touches on the first half of 2026 data set for the software lifecycle engineering practice. All that to say it's the latest data that we've gathered from decision makers around people who are investing in AI, using IT organizations, as well as development tools, operational tools, some of the security tools, not as in depth that Fernando covers, but it touches on that a bit. Observability is a big aspect of it. It's exciting time to be in the industry, and this is one of the biggest shifts I've seen in spending in the IT realm. And I can't remember. I mean, it's kind of like the cloud era, but we're compressing 3 years into 3 months. It's really been a pretty remarkable change.
All right. Well, we want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Security Boulevard Podcast. Remember, if you like this conversation, we'd love it if you'd subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application so you don't miss any of our episodes. We'd also love it if you'd leave a rating and a review and a comment because all of those things help the show grow and reach new audiences. This podcast is brought to you by SecurityBoulevard.com and the Future Room Group. For more show notes and episode information, head over to SecurityBoulevard.com, the TechStrong TV website, or our new favorite TechStrong TV app, which is available on Apple TV, Roku, and smart devices all over the world. Make sure you're following Security Boulevard on our socials like X, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just look for Security BLVD. We thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.